What else is on your mind?
Oh, there's more on my mind.
Yeah. Here we go. Yeah.
There's more on my mind.
Yeah.
I know you've been in your book. You used the metaphor as a bubble, breaking bubbles, And to me, it's kind of interesting because that metaphor really talks to me in my life and my experience, about things. But how does bubble forms actually, or the consciousness of your bubble, Because I can see, if I look at my own life, I can have an idea about something, then I meet you and I can realize my idea is some kind of shatters, It's like, to me, the bubble bursts.
Yeah.
And it's a natural process in life. Sometimes I'm relaxed and it doesn't really matter. I'm cool with everything that happens around me.
Yeah. No, so, I think maybe the major insight about bubbles is that this is a universal phenomenon. And it's a universal phenomenon, I think, because whenever we, as creator beings, form a pattern of our consciousness, what helps to hold that pattern is the fact there are limitations around it. So the limitations define the scope, and it's the part of the natural structure of things. Then that there is this bubble. It contains a pattern for the flow of consciousness, and when consciousness is flowing in that pattern, then it's cut off from other things. It's separated from other possibilities and held within the bubble. I think that it's an entirely natural process that the universe is overflowing with bubbles. If you look at the universe as a cosmos of consciousness, not just as a cosmos of solid objects and rocks, because most of cosmos looks like empty space that way. Then you see maybe more realistically what the cosmos is sort of there producing. What's filling this space is consciousness, it being a garden for consciousness. And so for me, talking about bubbles is, I'm going to say, it's simply capturing the natural way in which consciousness evolves, because I don't know. Now we're getting to consciousness, saying that in our typical language and our typical metaphors, you talked about the fact that the dimensional levels seem to be sort of stacked, and you say that's a conventional metaphor that we use for describing something, But in the metaphors that people use when they talk about consciousness, they very often talk about it as if it's your consciousness or my consciousness, right? Or it's like consciousness is a static thing, and I think it's only static when you're not really paying attention to it, because it's actually always flowing. It's a moving thing. And then I think too that our individual consciousness is part of something greater. We have a little piece of God's consciousness, that's what we have. But how do we find ourselves in the illusion that our consciousness is limited? It's because our consciousness is flowing through our bubbles. Then it's inside the bubbles, and the bubbles are holding it in limitation. So long as our bubbles are static, we have this illusion that our consciousness is static. You can say that, in a way that my consciousness is the sum of all the bubbles through which my consciousness flows, and say, I can sort of understand then that she has a consciousness and he has a consciousness, But in fact, it's something flowing and dynamic. And it also maybe helps us to understand that our consciousness isn't stuck being one way, that if the bubbles change, if bubbles break, if you form new bubbles, then effectively you've changed the patterns through which your consciousness can flow, and then you've changed something about yourself.
So you're talking about like it's the same consciousness that flows through everything?
Yeah. I think when we come right down to it, that's the reality.
Yeah.
No, and that we live in this illusion that we have separateness. That's the whole essence of a bubble. It's the illusion of separateness. And long as our consciousness is flowing through bubbles that maintain that illusion of separateness, we're caught in the illusion that we're separate. We're caught in the illusion that we're different from one another. But in fact, our commonality is what we share is probably much more important than what the differences are.
And the commonalities are probably much greater than the differences in the end.
No, because to evolve to what people call higher consciousness, right? Which is it's just another metaphorical way of speaking. To evolve toward higher consciousness. Maybe it would be more accurate to say broader consciousness. What you need to do is to break out of the bubbles that keep your consciousness in small, limited patterns, to open it up to larger bubbles that hold more wisdom or more complex knowledge, to be open to experiencing the world around you in these other ways. And it's, I think then that we could understand our evolution as people as being, breaking through the limiting bubbles to come to broader and broader and more inclusive bubbles that come closer and closer to being, adjuncts of God's source.
So are those patterns a result of evolution, that they're unfolding one by another, through
you could
generations?
Say, and it's you could say I think the result of human evolution, because I think that human beings as creator beings have this natural capacity to create bubbles. It's part of our nature. And if we stop and look at ourselves, ever so briefly, we can see that we're doing this all the time. That we're creating these patterns. Whenever we give energy to something that we understand as a pattern, or we repeat a pattern over and over again, we're creating a bubble. And you add lots of bubbles together, and you have a world view, you have a culture. You start sharing bubbles with other people, and all of us giving energy to a lot of the same beliefs and a lot of the same patterns. Those bubbles become the basis for collective consciousness. Whether it's a small group or society as a whole, or whether it's all of humanity, we give energy to patterns of consciousness that are held in isolation and separation in bubbles.
But the patterns, to me, it seems like they are needed to function here on Earth.
Yes, absolutely.
That we need our patterns to get something done at all in life.
Yes, no, and that's a good point. Consciousness needs limitations. And that sounds like an ironic thing to say, but consciousness needs patterns. It needs some place to flow. If as you break more and more patterns, more and more bubbles, what happens is your consciousness has a greater range of possibilities. It's more open. There's more freedom. You're not constrained, to follow certain patterns all the time. That's the evolution of a higher consciousness, a freer consciousness. But then you're basically moving from bubbles that contain concepts of your own limitations to bubbles that contain other concepts or other ways of experiencing yourself in harmony and alignment with your higher self and the higher dimensions. You find those bubbles And that's where your consciousness then is residing.